Morning, everybody. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Phil Lewis. I'm the Research Director at, Ian got it right first time round, Intelatus. I think Intelatus, like Toys R Us. Quick disclaimer, don't bet your house on anything we're going to say today. We're just going to present some scenarios, some ideas of future. But for those who don't know us, we're a business consultant, small firm, specialising on the marine and offshore sectors. So anybody wants to get any more information on us, please contact me at the break or after the event. So today we've been asked to talk about vessel demand. So we've got a big topic. We're going to talk about energy market development, oil and gas, the bottom fixed wind segment and the floating wind segment, all in 25 minutes. So it's going to be a bit of a rush. So I apologise for that, but a lot of material. So I'm going to start by presenting three scenarios. These are developed by the International Energy Agency. It's not exactly how the future is going to look. These are scenarios of what it could look. And the three scenarios we're going to talk to about a few times throughout this presentation. And this slide presents oil, natural gas, renewables, and ocean renewables, how that develops up through 2030 in these scenarios. And the scenarios are the blue line, which is the steps, the stated policies, which is what people have said they're doing and actually doing. So therefore, it's the most conservative, highest emissions case today, the most realistic case. The red line, that's the APS, the aspirational targets. That's what governments have basically said we're going to do, we want to do, but they're not actually doing at the moment. So there's a disconnect between what's stated and being done and what's aspired to be done. And then you've got the grey line, which is the aspirational targets to get to, the net zero targets, what we need to do to get to net zero by 2050. Now in oil and gas, we've also added on the depletion line. So what we're basically saying, if you stop E&P activity today, and wells deplete at an average 4.5% per year, what's that supply base look by 2050? Which is effectively, by the time you get to 2050, it's a net zero case. So no E&P activity, don't really have oil and gas. And that's the driver for E&P activity in the short term. Would say with numbers, there are always lies, damn lies, and statistics, as Mark Twain would say. Not everybody agrees with the IEA scenarios, or people use different parts of the scenarios. But even if you look at historical numbers, so for instance, the oil figures for 2022, so historical figures reported by the EIA from the USA, 100 million barrels, OPEC and IEA all have different numbers. And when you look at their forecast numbers, they're also different. So there are lots of numbers out there, lots of scenarios. The future's not set, there's just a range of scenarios and uncertainty with which we work in, but change is on the way. So we're talking about emissions today, and Ian talked about the IMO strategy. Now that's, as he said, it's a strategy, it's not regulations. The regulations won't come out till 2027. What we've graphed on the left-hand side is the IEA's forecast of marine emissions. We've put this as an index, and we've got the IMO strategy as the green line, which we can see as a most conservative approach. The IMO's business as usual case, as Ian mentioned, is based on the fourth greenhouse gas studies, which had tank to wake emissions at 1.13 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide in 2008. The business as usual case saw them maintaining at between that 1 billion and 1.5 billion tonnes by 2050. So the BAU case is actually quite wide, a bit between the straight line on that curve and then the step scenario from IEA. So IEA's business as usual curve, growing emissions, falling emissions in aspirational targets, eventually in net zero quite low. But in all cases, oil meets most of the demand for the fueling. Natural gas and biofuels meet around 4% of demand in the STEP scenario and 6% in the APS. Ammonia, hydrogen, electricity and e-methanol meet around 4% of the 2030 APS demand, hardly make a scratch in STEPs. Non-energy carrier and converter technologies, as Ian say, play an important role. Hydrodynamics, Industry 4.0, wind-assisted propulsion, carbon capture storage, various technologies. One of the issues are that there are multiple regulatory frameworks and they're not all fully aligned. And I think Klein Co will probably touch on this later. Global, you've got the IMO where the regulations aren't set yet. EU, obviously, there's some quite well publicized information there. US, you've got the EPA, for example, but even within the US, you have a state, California, which has different regulations, more stringent regulations in the Air Resources Board, commercial harborcraft regulations, which when we get to floating wind in the future, that will have an impact on the installation vessels because these are very stringent requirements. Now, we've got about 1,500 alternative fuel internal combustion engines active on order today, of which around 70% are LNG. Methanol's making a good impact. LPG's generally in the LPG tanker fleet. Hydrogen and ammonia is still a very small percentage. We have also fuel cells and battery energy storage systems as well. One of the issues, and I think there'll be one of the themes today, is producing these fuels. You can have a vessel, but can you get the fuel? And one of the things we want to touch on here is, irrespective of how you make, and we've used the case of methanol here, irrespective of how you make it, by biomass, renewable electricity, natural gas, coal, even nuclear, you're going to get CH3OH at the end of the day. You don't know if it's low carbon, high carbon, renewable, non-renewable, green, blue, grey, brown. So when we talk about well-to-wake emissions, producing enough fuel and then certifying what that process is to make it zero emissions, it's going to be an interesting challenge. I don't think the frameworks are certainly not aligned today. There are too many certification processes, so a lot of work needs to be done on that to make these vessels a reality. So let's shift into the oil and gas production. Sorry, there's no timer. We'll look at the charts here. We've got oil and natural gas with the steps and APS scenarios, and the different colors are all the different regions. So what we're saying is you can't just look at the oil and gas industry globally. You've got to break it down by region, but the main story takeaway is production shifts to the Middle East market, onshore and shallow water offshore in steps. Deep water, South and Central America, oil and gas, Africa gas are all growing in the step scenario. What we've shown on the right-hand chart is total production and that which is offshore, which for oil is around about 25% and gas 30 to 35%. If we stop E&P tomorrow, take that 4.5% decline rate, which we know for offshore is actually a more aggressive rate, the grey bar shows the amount by 2050 of oil and gas production left. So that's a driver for E&P activity, just to stand still or even halt the decline. And so replacing reserves and growing demand is driving drilling rig utilization, and drill ships have seen increased utilization. Jackups, particularly if you look at the chart on the right in the Middle East, that's been a driver for jackup growth, although of late there's been quite a few contract suspensions, so we'll see how that impacts the market. But you have to look not just globally at the utilization, you do have to look at the regional activity and the different trades. But drilling is generally more active. Sign of activity. In the production side, in the floating production segment, which for us, we look at all of the segments, but this chart represents FPSOs, FLNGs, and FPUs, so TLPs, spars, semis. FPSOs remain the largest subsegment by 2030. The Americas, that's North and South, and Africa will account for over 2/3 of the global FPSs. And on the right, we show a snapshot of 2023 to 2030, with the yellow charts, the yellow bar basically being Central and Southern America. So that's really Brazil, Guyana. Africa is a range of countries providing that in an ever-expanding geographic area. And North America is Gulf of Mexico, US and Mexico, plus Canada. Very active markets. Now, starting to get into the vessels, so this deep and harsh weather drilling, production and decommissioning and emerging floating wind is driving increased utilization in the large anchor handler fleet. And large anchor handlers, we're looking at 100-ton bollard pull and above. And the trend has been for sales and purchase of vessels and companies rather than new building vessels. There are still a few laid up vessels, but technically bringing them back into the fleet, it's very, very costly nowadays. There's an argument for new building from a numerical point of view, although from a financial point of view, we have our doubts. The large anchor handlers technically are not necessarily efficient when we get to the floating wind space, but the investment required for them is very difficult to justify at the moment. Large subsea fleets, even more utilization. There's high utilization in new building driven by subsea oil and gas construction, repair, decommissioning, and bottom fixed wind, subsea cable, and walk to work scopes. As you can see, there's very little laid up in the 100-ton AHC crane and above, and we've even got new building announced of late. So there's actually new building in this segment. And this is going to be a very heavily utilized segment going forward. But it's also a fairly mobile segment that goes from region to region to region, which is an issue. In the heavy lift segment, more oil and gas commissioning and decommissioning activity and increased bottom fixed wind demand and emerging floating wind segment is driving vessel utilization. Now, we've got a simplified heavy lift chart here. We've actually not shown the DLBs, derrick barges, shear legs. So this is just heavy lift crane vessels, the deep water construction vessels, basically the semis, and the new generation floating foundation installation vessels like Boskalis 1 and 2 that are more suitable for bottom fixed offshore wind foundation installation, which is a nice segue into the offshore wind market and the forecasts on where we see that growing. Like everybody, we got a nice ski jump going up of 65 gigawatts today to around about 475 gigawatts by 2035, with China, the UK, and the wider European market continuing to drive growth. And when we look at the turbines, a real vessel activity driver, it's European market, which is going to be the biggest market as we go in through the next decade. Let's just strip out China, which is a very unique market and the biggest single market in its own right, and from an installation point of view, because most international contractors are sort of more or less excluded from there. And let's focus on the bottom fixed segment for the moment. That goes from about 34 gigawatts in 23 to around 315 gigawatts by 2035. Now, that translates to over 21,000 turbines to be added. That's excluding China in that 24 to 2035 period, of which Europe is by far the biggest market. That will drive the vessels for construction and O&M and how a lot of these vessels look like. Now, offshore wind and the key drivers, projects are planning 20 megawatt and above turbines. The Western OEMs are planning 15 to 18 megawatts. There is talk of up to 20, 22 megawatts, but financially, I think we're just hearing around about 18 at the moment. That's 250-meter rotor diameters. The Chinese OEMs are rolling out larger turbines with 4 of them already, between 16 and 22 megawatts, and that goes up to a 310 plus meter rotor diameter. And the Chinese are certainly not going to just be active in China. They're very much focused on the export market, and it's not a question of if, it is very much when. And that means that they can become clients for installation contractors and maintenance contractors. And wind farms are getting deep and further offshore. Monopiles and jackets supporting the larger turbines are being deployed in deeper water, with the next generation factories planning 3 to 4,500 ton monopiles. You can see from the chart that's a big increase in where we are today. Now, that then impacts on the installation fleet, and we're looking here on the left-hand side at the turbine and foundation installation fleet using the 2 main drivers of hook height above sea level and maximum lift capacity, which are basically Generation 1 vessels are more or less out of this graph. They're technically obsolete, either been upgraded or just moved on to other things. Things have just got bigger. And on the right-hand side, we combine the supply and demand and do a very simple chart and an assumption that would have been laughable even a couple of years ago, looking at large vessel demand of 15 megawatt turbines and above, and small as below 15 megawatts. As I say, a few years ago, that would have been quite laughable, but that's where we sort of are for the future now with the size of the vessels. What the chart really shows, what you take away is that supply is effectively mathematically sufficient until past the middle of the next half of this decade. So, by 27, 28. But that very much counts on the productivity issues of new markets. So, obviously as Taiwan's emerged, there's been lessons learned. And the US, I would say there's some lessons being really learned on the efficiency, especially with the big wind farm like Vineyard, vessel productivity there. And I think if those productivities can't be brought down, we're going to be short of installation vessels much quicker than we're showing here. So it's a very nuanced balance there. Cable layers, large turbines, bigger wind farms built further offshore, and new markets are driving demand for more and larger cable layers. That means we've gone from sort of 1 carousel, 2 carousels, up to now we're even seeing 3 carousels on the layers. And also, obviously, those turbines are driving the bigger layers. In the logistics segments, growing logistics fleet is supporting construction, commissioning, and O&M. In the SOV segment, as oil and gas activity continues, we expect the supply of Tier 2, Tier 3 walk-to-work SOVs, that's the MPSVs and PSVs with rental or permanent gangways, likely to tighten as they go back to oil and gas industries. The chart shows are basically SOVs, which are more on long-term contracts for maintenance and operations. Steady growth there. The CSOV is sort of becoming a commoditized segment, but possibly enough demand there to soak up that supply at the moment, but if the market continues to fragment from an OEM point of view and a developer point of view, we might get into a situation of commoditization in the future. The CTV side, we've taken out around about 100 to 150 CTVs that have become technically obsolete from the first generations of CTVs and sort of moved on to other markets or just out the market. Europe's obviously the biggest market based on the larger number of turbines and larger historical activity. Asia, really, Taiwan and Japan are providing a sort of steady activity there. And the US now is coming on at scale in terms of new build deliveries. That's a growing fleet as well, but it's a fleet that keeps on regenerating. Now, closing out, we're going to talk about floating wind, and we're going to start with a very simple looking chart that a lot of developers sort of refer to about, how easy it's going to be to build a floating wind farm. So, we're all going to be building them tomorrow because it's quite easy. It's not. Just going from left to right, just talking about it. You've got three basic concepts. I mean, there are many, but there's over 150 designs out there now. But let's say there are three core concepts. There's the semi, the TLP, and the spar. And that's in the order of sort of precedence. Semi, TLP, spar are preference at the moment. And with the semis and with the others, you can build steel, you can build concrete. And steel at the moment in planning documents is coming out as more popular just globally. So prefabrication and precasting of components. If we look at a steel semi for a 15 megawatt turbine, 5 to 10,000 tons. In concrete, well over 10,000 tons. 1 gigawatt wind farm, 15 megawatt turbines. That's 66 of those units. They've got to be put out in a sort of, for a 1 year to 2 year installation period. That's a lot of steel or a lot of concrete going in the water. You've got to have quaysides where you can launch these into. That means submersible barges. You have to have cranes that can get hook heights above sea level of 180 to 200 meters, 800 ton plus capacities. Not many cranes about that can lift that with the outreach that's required for that. So that's a bottleneck for those commercial scale projects. We then get to the mooring prelay, and in particular mooring prelay and also the array cable prelay. Could happen 1, 2, 3 years before commercial operations with wet storage, as you've seen in the oil and gas industry, just because of the volumes involved. And that's going to be a real issue for the current construction fleet, which is really going to be anchor handlers and subsea vessels. They're going to be, they're technically inefficient for what's required, and we're going to be short of vessels if we want to meet the commercial forecast numbers. Towing, big anchor handlers and as well. Hookup and tensioning, anchor handlers subsea. The red lines in the chart, these are the dynamic array cables for collecting and transmitting the power to the between the arrays and the substation. Difference between bottom fixed, they're flexible and they're suited to vertical lay rather than horizontal lay, and very suited to subsea vessels, which are already very much in high demand in oil and gas. So we see a vessel shortage there. Transmission could be a floating substation, could be, if the conditions are right, a bottom fixed substation, or increasingly we're seeing trends to move to subsea technology similar to found in the oil and gas industry, and there's some very exciting technologies there that can enable, actually also support bottom fixed wind stations as well, but very, very relevant for floating wind. So what we see the forecast, and again, this is a very aggressive forecast going from the pilot and demonstration projects today. We've got a lot of pre-commercial projects on the books that have been approved and are beginning to move forward. Commercial raise, in theory, towards the end of the decade, but no FIDs taken yet. That means pre-lay going on in this decade. We've said 7 gigawatts by 2030. This is globally, including China. Very touch and go because it really depends what goes on in Asia Pacific in the 24-30 period, which is really driven by South Korea, which has the plans, yet there's not an FID. So if those FIDs start happening, that will be a busy market. And the market will exceed 65 gigawatts by 2035, and that's really driven by the European market. Now, one thing I want to do is compare a typical, there's no such thing as deep water FPSO and a typical floating wind project to give a conservative forecast of anchor and mooring lines, a rule of thumb forecast, if you will. And why we've done that is, from a capital point of view, a large wind farm and a deep water FPSO project, probably similar-ish capital values and time values. And they've got some same, bigger processes. So we're starting on this left-hand side with the 1 gigawatt wind farm. Sorry, the pointer's just about working. The 1 gigawatt wind farm. So with 15 megawatt turbines, that's 66 turbines, 1,000 meters of mooring line per line, let's say on average, because we're going to be in 100, 120, 150 meters of water. 3 lines per floater. You might certainly see a lot more than that, but minimum 3. Mooring, that gives you 198,000 meters of mooring lines and 198 anchors. Okay, that's just numbers. So we'll put that against an FPSO with 16 anchors on average. Could be more, could be less, but let's say 16. And then a bit deeper water, so 2,500 meters of mooring line per line, 16 lines, that's 40,000 meters, 16 anchors. So same capital project, same time, same effort. Suddenly you've got a multiple of supply components required. Then if we apply to our pre-lay forecast, now these aren't CODs, 24, 2030. This is the pre-lay activity, so happening on the commercial wind farms probably 2 years before. So that's for COD, could be 2031, 2032. And then we compare that with our FPS forecast, and that's probably pre-lay the year before. We've got about 1,100 systems requiring pre-lay in floating wind in 2024 to 2030 period, and 142 floating production systems. That's the main floating production systems are the FPSOs, FLNGs, FPUs. That's 3.3 million meters of mooring lines. This is rule of thumb based, not bottom-up forecast based, which is a lot higher number, against about sort of 6 million of floating production systems. So we've got high vessel utilization, a supply chain geared towards those sorts of volumes. Suddenly you're adding 3.3 million meters of mooring lines. That's percentage-wise, that's a very big jump. But look at the anchors, there are a lot more anchors. So and that means the vessels that transport and install anchors, even though they may be different types of anchors, is going to be at a premium. And then when we get to the 2031, 2035 pre-lay forecast, when those commercial wind farms really scope up. This is based on the technologies available today. There is a lot of work to try and improve the technologies, but based on available technology, we get to 15,000 anchors in a 5-year period and 15 million meters of mooring lines. And that's a conservative rule of thumb forecast. The actual numbers, if we're going to meet the developer actual plans, we're going to struggle with supply chain issues. So in the mooring vessels, the construction vessels, if you will, in offshore, is it a widely available asset? Well, and it's going to be based on anchor handlers and subsea vessels. And with an installation vessel shortage after the middle of the decade, we're sort of questioning, what do these vessels look like? And because I would say also one thing, one of the issues with the existing fleet is that because they're designed for drilling rigs and floating production systems, the components in floating wind are technically generally bigger. You're talking bigger chain, much bigger chain, which the handling equipment isn't necessarily designed for. Bigger mooring lines, bigger anchors. It's not necessarily, so the equipment isn't necessarily designed to be efficient. Technically, they may be able to do it, but it's the efficiency of taking the volume. So we need high bollard pull, anchor handling frames, large AHC cranes, large back decks, multiple high-capacity, large volume winches, large chain lockers, work-class ROVs, flexibility to support different tensioning options, low and zero emission operations, and embedded digitalization. Vessels like that are not cheap. The last of the big anchor handlers built, ordered more than a decade ago now, they were costing around about $80 million. You had Island Victory come after that about 120. These will easily be 150 to 200 million. No one's going to take an FID today on that, on the contracts that are available, because the day rates don't justify it and the contracts aren't in place to justify that sort of level of spend. It's got to be a vessel that can be used for other work and therefore maybe have some inherent inefficiencies. So there'll be a trade-off. We just want to close out on O&M, just because we said there's already a problem with construction, with the volume of construction vessels and their efficiency. It's not saying there's bad vessels out there. They weren't designed for something we're asking them to do. Operations and maintenance at the moment, there are many different technologies being looked at for major turbine repair, but currently tow to port is a preferred option. Other technologies will emerge, but at the moment it's tow to port. Array cables, you need subsea vessels, and they're at a premium already. So into a tight market, we're putting more demand. So what basically, you've got 2 big projects, say, of Scotland we're looking at. Kincardine, 5 turbines. 2 of those have already gone back to port. And Hywind Scotland, they've got 5 turbines, all 5 are going back to port this year. And the schedule we're showing there is Kincardine 3, which was done in 2022, had a plan of 25 days, took 40 days, and included 100 vessel days, including some large anchor handlers and subsea vessels. In a market that's already tight, when you start introducing commercial wind farms, when you get failure rates of 40% to 100% of the turbines, as in they need to go back for major repair, you need a maintenance fleet that can support that, or the industry grinds to a halt very, very quickly. Or you need those alternative technologies brought on, much quicker than they are, to give developers the confidence to take FIDs. So wrapping up in this quick sprint, apologies for the speed. Energy transition, energy system is in transition, but the drivers remain for sustained offshore oil and gas activity, particularly in the shallow water Middle East, deep water, Americas and Africa, where the construction, O&M and or decommissioning, a positive driver for all of us in the room. Bottom fixed offshore wind segment is growing, and the increased floating wind activity in Europe, China drive growth. More activity, larger turbines and deeper water is driving vessel demand. Increasing utilisation and competition for key assets, such as subsea and anchor handlers, will translate to higher day rates and, in theory, ordering, and we've certainly seen that in the subsea segment. But barriers to vessel FID still exist through technical, regulatory and financial uncertainties. New vessels will likely need to feature low and zero emissions technologies, fuel flexibility, battery energy storage, energy heat recovery, embedded digitalisation. And just closing off this, hardware is one issue, but software, people, will also be a significant challenge. Attracting and retaining the next generation of talent and building sufficient technical competence in a timely manner is a real challenge for the whole industry. So apologies for the quick rush, but hopefully that helped you out. And that's just a picture of a small project going on in the floating wind space off Spain last year, a single turbine, and already that would stretch one of the biggest anchor handlers in the market. But anybody want to get any more information offline, they can get me at philiplewis@intelatus.com. Thanks for your attention and enjoy the day today.